Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Welcome to the United Nations. Our guest today is Zeid Ra'ad Al Hussein, the United Nations Human Rights Chief. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I want to begin with a dramatic situation at the border between Burma and Bangladesh. We've seen an exodus of hundreds of thousands of members of the Rohingya, this Muslim minority. It's a humanitarian disaster, but you said recently it's a textbook example of ethnic cleansing. Is this what you're still seeing today, despite all the protests from the international community?
Yes, we have a team in Cox's Bazar who have been on a daily basis interviewing the refugees who had fled. And on the basis of what they had been telling us, which is consistent with an earlier investigation we put together back in December of last year, it's consistent with what we heard earlier and with satellite imagery. And what we sense is, we sensed it from the very beginning, was that this was no anti-insurgency operation. This was so disproportionate. And the testimonies from various parts of northern Rakhine corroborated the fact that the pattern seemed to be the same always, with the army encircling a particular location, threats being made, and then houses being burnt. Now, there will be exceptions. There will be other examples where maybe this never happened, but the broad sort of pattern is there. If the authorities in Myanmar believe this is an exaggeration from us...
This is what they're saying.
Which is what they're saying. Well, then let us in. I have been asking from Aung San Suu Kyi back in November. I said, let us in. We will go an unfettered access. We will go to all parts of northern Rakhine, and we will confirm your point of view if we believe the evidence is up to it. And if not, then we will, of course, dispute it. And she never, or the authorities never allowed us in. So when
even recently, they again refused to allow.
They're not allowing us in. Now, yesterday she said they're prepared for outside scrutiny. Well, and I hope
and she condemned human rights violations.
And she condemned human rights violations.
It's not enough?
Well, I was hoping also she would allude to this campaign. It's not simply that violence erupted between various communities and the state is trying to control it. There is a campaign that's been undertaken.
But is it really ethnic cleansing? This is a very charged word.
From what we can see, it fits the description absolutely. It will be up to a court at a later stage when examining all the evidence presented by a criminal investigation to make a complete determination. What we can see, yes, it fits that description.
And that's a crime against humanity, obviously.
It is a crime against humanity if it's organized and planned, and certainly there seems to be that in place.
I want to get to another dreadful situation that's less talked about in the press, at least. In Yemen, there's been a war raging. You've accounted over 5,000 civilians killed. Many more have been injured. But it seems nothing is changing in Yemen. How would you describe the situation in Yemen?
Well, no one seems to be spared the suffering. All civilian installations seem to be at the mercy in various parts of the country to attacks from Houthi Saleh on one side or the coalition on the other. And
deliberate attacks?
We believe many of the attacks seem to be deliberate because no military advantage seems to be gained. The disproportionate way that the targets are attacked, I mean, disproportionate to whatever threat they pose, and the lack of any compliance with IHL in practice. Now, they may say that they're complying with the international humanitarian law, but we don't see it on the ground. The majority of casualties, including where children are concerned, are as a result of the coalition airstrikes. For the last...
They are the main culprits. Because we've seen bombings of funerals, hospitals, schools.
The majority of the
Saudi-led coalition.
Yes, the majority of the casualties seem to come from the coalition. It doesn't say, I'm not saying that Houthi Saleh have not committed any violations of human rights, serious violations. Only, I think yesterday, and we were looking at it, we heard a report in Taiz where there had been some shelling of civilian areas, and we suspect it's from the Houthis, and we'll comment on it. But for the last 3 years, I have asked for an international investigation.
At least 3 times.
3 times. And now the discussions are in Geneva, and we as an office will settle for nothing less. No other arrangement other than an international investigation will do, given the scale and intensity of the suffering of the people of Yemen.
But the Saudis don't want it. I mean, they're essentially backing an internal probe. I believe you think it's a sham or a whitewash.
No, well, we tried it, and it hasn't produced the sort of results that we were expecting. We had said the first year, you know, okay, if the Yemeni commission, you want that to take precedence, fine, we will still assert the need for an international investigation, but we'll allow it space. 2 years on, it's manifest that it cannot do this job, and we do need an international investigation in place.
Just on Saudi Arabia, we've seen arrests in recent days of clerics, advocates. Obviously, there are already many human rights issues in Saudi Arabia. Are you concerned about a further crackdown in that country?
Well, it's good you ask, because I have asked the office. We heard the reports from the media first, I have to confess. We do have an office and a colleague in Riyadh, and I've asked them to corroborate this. And certainly, on the face of it, it's something that has to be reversed, and these people have to be released. So I'm going to circle back onto this shortly.
Burundi, now
Yes.
obviously another crisis happening without any solution inside. There are many investigations going on. What is your assessment of the current situation in Burundi?
Well, the Commission of Inquiry released its report a couple of weeks ago, and then yesterday it was formally presented to the Human Rights Council. And it paints a very stark and grim picture of the country. We have, for many years now, we've been saying that in a country where there's impunity for the worst offenses, it's not to say that some people haven't been arrested and charged, but the worst offenses, there seems to have been a complete impunity. The Imbonerakure is still very active.
The youth militia.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Connected to the CND, the ruling party. And we sort of have warned that unless they were brought under control early on, this was going to spiral in the direction it has done. We've now for months been saying we worry about these rallies that took place earlier in the year, where the CNDD-FDD, the ruling party, assembled youth, and they were chanting in a way which was deeply problematic and reminiscent of the Interahamwe in Rwanda many years ago.
Obviously, there's the shadow of genocide hanging over Burundi.
That's right. And occasionally, we worry that it seems to be taking an ethnic turn. It hasn't completely done so, and so it is held in check. But, you know, 1 or 2 unforeseen developments, and then the country could be in peril. We are determined to help where we can, but we need to have a mandate in the country that allows us to monitor and report. At the moment,
they won't allow you in.
They have frozen all activities with our office. We're trying to negotiate an agreement. It's proving to be extremely difficult.
More broadly, I want to get to human rights situation worldwide. You've heard the US President Donald Trump deliver his speech at the United Nations General Assembly. There's a lot of talk about sovereignty, but more than direct reaction to his speech, is Donald Trump bad news for human rights worldwide?
Well, I've said previously, the return with some force of an ethno-nationalistic agenda, I mean, it brought ruin to the world twice in the 20th century. How many times do we have to experience the full effects of it to realize that there is no positive outcome at the end of the day? It's only by working together in the broader interest that you actually serve your narrower interest, not the other way around. The other way around spells ultimate disaster for everyone.
Are you saying that by his speech, by his attitude, by his seemingly lack of interest for human rights, Donald Trump is sending also the wrong signals to the rulers of Russia, China, Egypt, Turkey? I can go through a whole list. And that, as a result, human rights are in peril.
Well, I think there does seem to be a radiation outward. When the president, for example, attacked journalists and media outlets in his rally in Arizona, it was quite noticeable. I mean, almost the very next day, we saw in Cambodia, the officials there cite the President of the United States, almost use his words, and they revoked the license of a radio station, and the further clampdown on the media. So yes, if those watching President Trump need to have some sort of further leverage over their own people, they may well take it. And we saw, for instance, Aung San Suu Kyi refer to reports from various quarters, including possibly my office, that this was fake news. And so there is a sort of an effect there that we have to be extremely wary about.
Right. You're in the last year of your mandate, obviously you're monitoring daily a number of human rights situations. Would you say that the situation is worse today than it was when you started?
Well, it's a complex picture. You know, the law of contradiction doesn't work really in terms of international affairs, because there is plenty that's good that we can cite. I mean, the broader arc is still there, and we see populations, you know, reacting to the messages from demagogues and populists. We saw the election results in France and in the Netherlands and in Austria. And it sort of reversed a trend which seemed to be really quite dangerous, taking us back decades as opposed to propelling us forward. And so our faith is still in the peoples of states, in the human rights defenders who take enormous risks, in journalists, in lawyers who in oppressive situations are still willing to stand up on principle and assert their rights. And that gives us hope.
Okay, thank you very much for coming on our show. And thank you very much for watching this interview here on France 24. Stay tuned for more news.
Porque la historia se escribe día a día. Porque la actualidad no espera. La información, donde quiera que esté. En cualquier circunstancia. Todos los temas. Para entender el mundo, para imaginar el mundo. France 24, una mirada diferente, a partir del 26 de septiembre, en español.
Reporters, presented by Marc Perelman.
In Jerusalem, 30% of the population is ultra-Orthodox. They're known as the Haredim, men who fear God. They recognize only one authority, that of the Creator.
Ils n'écoutent que le rabbin. Pour eux, le rabbin, c'est le médecin, c'est le juge, c'est le Premier ministre, c'est la loi.
In Jerusalem, as in many other cities in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox have their own neighborhoods, their own shops and schools. But they regularly come into conflict with the authorities. Our reporters went to Jerusalem to investigate these men in black defying the Israeli state.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.